everybody, and welcome to another episode of Get Ready for Game Night, the YouTube channel where I teach you how to play some of my favorite games in a casual, unscripted style, just as though you're sitting right here at the table with me. Tonight, via special request from a subscriber, Jeremy Berger. What's up, Jeremy? I'm going to be teaching you how to play Fury of Dracula. So let's get right to it. I have set the game up, and in this game, it doesn't matter how many players are playing, between 2 and 5, it's always set up the same way. Now, I'm not going to go over how the setup works because it comes with this great Learn to Play manual. And in that manual, they teach you step by step how to set up the game. But this is basically what the board will look like whenever you set it up. Now, after you've set it up in the Learn to Play, there is sort of the basic, what they recommend as your first game, and then there's the more advanced game, and the advanced game is explained in the rules reference. I'm going to be teaching you the advanced game in the rules reference, which is a great tool. You should go back and read it if you have any questions or looking for clarifications as you're playing. So let's teach you Fury of Dracula. So in Fury of Dracula, it's always 4 characters, Lord Goldeming, Dr. John Stewart, Van Helsing, and Mina Harker versus Dracula. And that's true whether it's 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 1, it doesn't matter. One player will always play Dracula, and that's all they do. And then all the remaining players will control all 4 of these characters. So if it's a 3-player game, then each of the 2 other players would control 2 characters each, and so on. You get the idea. The premise is that these 4 characters are hunting throughout all of Europe to try to find and kill Dracula and destroy him before he's able to accumulate 13 influence points by creating new vampires and spreading chaos throughout Europe. It is a hidden movement game where Dracula is going to be moving throughout Europe, but you don't know where he is. These characters have to locate him first, investigate his locations, and then eventually fight him and hopefully kill him off to save the day. Up here in the upper right-hand part of the board, you can see where sort of the score is kept for the game. This marker here marks Dracula's influence over all of Europe. And if this marker ever gets here to 13, Dracula wins the game. That's how he wins. So the hunters have to kill Dracula before he gets to 13. This clock represents the rounds of the game, and every round of the game has both a day phase and a night phase, where the hunters will take their actions, and then after each night phase, Dracula will take his actions. We'll explain this in more detail a little bit later. And then up here, I have 3 what are called despair tokens and 3 rumor tokens. And what happens is, every time this clock token makes it all the way around the board, representing 1 week basically, as soon as it crosses back over into Monday, you're going to add 1 despair token to the clock. And Dracula is going to get more and more powerful as the game goes on, because a lot of the cards in the game will refer to Dracula adding influence, a certain number of influence based on how many despair tokens there are on the board. The other thing that despair does is when the hunters actually try to fight Dracula, the more despair tokens that are currently on the board, the longer Dracula has to stay and fight them before he is able to run off. Now, the last thing I have up here, these are called rumor tokens. And I like to, during setup, put these rumor tokens right on top of the despair tokens as a reminder that whenever a new despair token is added to the clock, Dracula gets to take one of these rumor tokens. He starts with 1, and he can get 3 more throughout the game. So I put the rumor tokens right on top of the despair tokens as a reminder. So this is an advanced game, which means the hunter characters can all start in any city that the players choose. I've chosen to have Lord Goldeming start in Madrid, Dr. John Stewart start in Paris, Van Helsing up in Hamburg, and Mina Harker is going to start all the way over on the eastern part of the map in Constanta. And Dracula will always go in this space here. Because it's a hidden movement game, this represents whatever city is hidden on this card. In this case, Zurich. So at the start of this game, Dracula is actually in Zurich, although his figure will remain here until he is discovered. Let's start by talking about what the hunters do on their turn. As I said, every round of the game consists of both a day phase and a night phase, represented by the sun yellow and moon gray colored spaces on this time tracker. During the day phase, every hunter will take exactly one action, then they'll go to the night phase where every hunter will take exactly one action, and then Dracula will get to go. So let's talk about what the hunters can do during the day phase. It's real easy to remember what you do on a turn because every single hunter's player sheet has the turn sequence listed on the right-hand side. You have Dawn, which only has to do with combat after Dracula's been discovered. Day, one action. Dusk, again, a combat round. Night, one action. And then you go on to Dracula. So what are the actions that you can do? Let's take a look. Every hunter character also gets an actions reminder card that tells you basically what all your actions are available when it's your turn to act. We'll go over all of these in detail, but briefly, you can move, you can reserve a ticket, which is a way to move faster. Rest, because you're going to be taking damage during the game. Rest will remove one damage. Search we'll talk about later. If there are any cards that let you do a special action, you could do that. You could supply, which is getting cards that will help you fight and locate Dracula. Or you can make trades as long as you're in the same city as the other character. You can trade items. So the move action is just what you'd think it is. You can move. If during the day phase, which you can only move during the day phase, so remember that, you want to move your character because you're trying to find Dracula, you can pick up your character. We've got Lord Goldeming here, and maybe, oh, I'm sorry, this isn't Lord Goldeming, this is Dr. John Stewart. Maybe you want to move. Well, you have these red lines, and you can move exactly one space away along the red lines. That's called traveling via a road. So on your turn, your entire action would be, I'm traveling one space to an adjacent city. Now I say adjacent, it's considered adjacent if any road or railway is connecting it. All right, so that's one way you can move. If you are in a port city, which has this little anchor symbol on it, for your move you could go out to sea, in which case now you're in this sea space. And that would be the end of your move as well. Let me clarify a little bit more on the sea spacing. First of all, a hunter can only move from a port city, denoted by these little anchors, into a sea space as their movement action. They also have the ability for one movement, they can go from one sea space to an adjacent sea space. And adjacent sea spaces are separated by these dotted lines. Now, when you move via sea, again, you can only move during the day, and if you are at sea during the day, your action must be to move. You cannot pass during the day if you're at sea. Thematically, you're on an ocean liner, you're always moving. A few other things. Dracula, when he plays a sea space card, does not put an encounter card on it, because Dracula and you are not necessarily on the same ship. So you don't actually have an encounter, even if you're on the same sea space as Dracula. The other thing is that Dracula, if you go into the same sea space as him, he does not have to reveal that location card. It is the one exception to the rule. You could be at sea in the same area as Dracula, and you just would not know it. So, when you're at sea, you must either move from the sea to a port, a sea to a sea during the day. If it's nighttime and you're at sea, all you can do is pass. Your entire turn is skipped. So while you can move vast distances, you could go from Alicante out here, and then to here, and then all the way up here, you do skip your turn at night if you're at sea. If you're in a city which has these rails, another way you could move is by spending a train ticket. Now these train tickets are something that you can pick up, but if you want to travel via rail, you have to turn in a train ticket. Now, this gets a little funky, but it is, I guess, historically accurate. If you are traveling along the white rail lines, which are these here, then you can move exactly a number of cities equal to the white number. So if he was up here in Cologne and he spent this ticket for 3, he could travel along the white lines 1, 2, 3. And that's how that works. If, however, any number of the rail lines that you want to use are yellow, and all of the rails in Eastern Europe are yellow, which I guess around this time period, the rails in Eastern Europe were garbage and compared to the ones in Western Europe, you have to use the yellow number. So in this example, going from Strasbourg to Zurich to Milan, because at least one of those rails is yellow, you have to use the yellow number printed on the ticket. Another thing you could do as the sole action during the day or night phase is you could reserve a ticket. These are the train tickets that we just talked about for movement. The only way you can get these is you spend your entire action reserving a ticket. And they're supposed to be in a random pile, or you could put them in an opaque container. So for your entire turn, you would just pick one, you'd look at it in secret, and you'd keep that face down on your player board until you wanted to spend it for a movement action. So that's reserve a ticket. If you chose to move by using one of your train tickets, then that ticket is then put back into the pile and is supposed to be randomized up a little bit. So whenever you're drawing a ticket, it's always from just a random pile. Whenever you use a ticket, it just goes back to that pile face down to potentially be drawn again. Another option is you can rest. When you rest, you just simply remove one damage token, which is what these things are, from your character. You'll accumulate damage throughout the game usually when you're fighting vampires. So if you ever reach a damage level equal to your health limit, in this case 9, well, guess what? You become incapacitated and a lot of bad things happen. So resting might be a good idea to get rid of one of those damages. Another action you could do on your turn is supply. And this is another action that's going to be different whether you're doing it during the day phase or the night phase. And it's also going to be different depending on where your character is on the map. So there are 2 different city types on the map. There's the big cities, which are the big squares, have like lots of little big buildings in it. And then there's the small cities, which are smaller squares, looks more like a village. If your character is in a big city, when you take the supply action, you do 2 things. First, you're going to draw an item card. These item cards are always good and they always help you. So during your supply, if you're in a big city, you're going to draw an item card and add it to your hand. In this case, we got Holy Bullets, which means that when you fight a vampire with a rifle or a pistol, the vampire is going to suffer 3 additional damage, but then this card has to be discarded. And this would just go to that player's hand. Now, after you draw your item, you're going to draw an event. And these events can be good or bad. If you're drawing this during the day phase, you draw off the top, and you can tell that this is good because it has the holy symbol on it. So you would draw this and just give it to that player, and it's in your hand. In this case, it's a speedy telegraph. During both day and night this hunter phase, the hunters can perform actions in any order. Ignore activation order. We'll talk about that in a second. But, oh, look at that. It's like an evil Dracula bat. If this is the card on top, then instead of drawing this and putting it in your hand as a hunter, you would simply draw it and discard it immediately. And the reason you want to do that is that these cards help Dracula. So if you can get these out of the game, that'd be a good thing. So during the day, you would draw this. If this is the top card, and just say, yep, that's out of the game. Oh no, it's another Dracula card. Well, we'll try to get rid of that also. Now, things change a little bit if you're in a small city. In small cities, they don't have big shops, so you cannot buy items. So if you supply up in a small city, all you're doing is you're drawing an event card. Again, if it's during the day, from the top to either discard it out of the game, or if it is a good guy symbol, you're drawing it into your hand. Now, when you draw these event cards, you do have to read out loud when they occur. For instance, this one says play immediately. This one says play during the Dracula phase. So you have to read out loud exactly when they occur, and if it says play immediately, you read the rest of it and it happens. Now, during the night phase, things get a little wonky. Again, if you're in a city, you draw one card from each pile. You draw an item and an event. And if you're in a small town, you're only drawing an event. But if it's night, well, the events you have much less control over. So when you draw a card from the event deck at night, you don't draw it from the top. You draw it from the bottom. And we look, hey, it's a good guy one. So you would read the timing of it and do its effects. But, oh no, if you draw a vampire card from the event deck during the night phase, this card immediately goes to Dracula. And these cards will help him in his quest to escape, evade, and increase his influence throughout all of Europe. So doing the supply action at night is much riskier for the hunters because you could potentially be helping Dracula when you do it. Now I said as you're drawing up these cards, you just put it into that character's hand. And each character has a different hand limit. And it's represented for the different card types. Here at the bottom, you have an item limit of 4 cards for Dr. John Stewart and 4 event cards for Dr. John Stewart. And all the characters will say what their hand limit is for the different types of cards here and here on their character card. If you're playing as one person controlling multiple characters, a lot of people will just store their cards here and here when they're not using them, just so they don't get confused about, which character am I controlling right now, so that when I'm controlling this character, I'm picking up those cards, and that's what I'm going to deal with. Now, one of those cards we talked about turn order, because you'll notice there's a number 2 up here by Dr. John Seward's card. When it is time for the hunters to go, they always go in the same order. It's always Lord Goldeming first, then John Seward, then Van Helsing, then Mina Harker. And they have the corresponding sort of initiative order on their cards. So there's Goldeming at 1, John Seward at 2, and so on. So you always have to go in that order regardless of how you're sitting around the table or where your characters are on the map. Another action you can do is trade. Assuming both characters are in the same city, you can freely trade items. So for instance, if Van Helsing had the Holy Bullets as their action, they could give that to John Seward. And that is the end of Van Helsing's action. Now you're not allowed to trade events. But wait a minute. Right here on Van Helsing's card it says, when you trade, you may choose to trade event cards instead of item cards with a hunter in any city. Well, that means Van Helsing has a special power. And in fact, every one of the hunters has a special power. I'm not going to go over them all, but you can just read. They usually have an active ability and a passive ability. So Van Helsing actually can trade these event cards. And he can trade them, send them all over the map. He can trade with them in any city. So Van Helsing could be over here, and on his turn, he could give local rumors to Dr. John Seward. So after all 4 hunters have done a daytime action and a nighttime action, it then becomes the Dracula phase. And the Dracula phase is largely going to be Dracula just moving around the board. And now how does he do that? Well, as I said, he's going to select a card that has his starting location and put it face down right here. Dracula actually has this entire deck, and these are every single city that appears on the map, and it's in alphabetical order, and in the lower left-hand corner they're numbered, and it really helps to keep these in order if you're the Dracula player. Save yourself a lot of headache, keep these cards in order. You also have the sea spaces for Dracula in case he wants to go on a ship and go out to sea. That is a little dangerous because you'll notice the back of these cards are blue. So whenever Dracula goes onto a sea space, the hunters will know that he is in fact at sea. So how does this work? Well, when it's Dracula's turn, he is going to select a new location. Well, back up. First, he's going to slide his last location down this queue. And what he's trying to do is get these locations to go all the way down and fall off the board. So what he's going to do, slide that down. He's then going to select a new location, and the new location must be an adjacent city to where Dracula currently is via road only. Dracula is really old and he hates trains, doesn't trust them. So he will not travel by train ever. So Dracula can only travel by road. He has to pick one city that is adjacent by road from the city he just left, and he would just find it in the deck and he would put it face down. So now Dracula is in this city. He was in here. But then whenever Dracula moves to a new city, he gets to sort of plant a trap there or plant an event. And so he's going to take one of these cards, well, not any one of them, because he starts the game out with 5 of these cards, and he will select one of these cards and put it face down on top of his current city. So he went to this city and he caused a little mischief. He planted something there. Now, why is that important? Well, these cards have 2 effects on them. They have a regular event and a matured effect, all right? If, during the course of the game, any one of the hunters ends up in a city that is currently in this array, in other words, it's on the trail that Dracula has left, Dracula must announce that, oh, you found me, I was in that city, I was in Zurich at some point, you know I'm now 1 city away from Zurich, and so you know I was there, you're on my trail. If there was an event card on Zurich, Dracula has the option. He can, what's called sabotage, I think, the hunter by immediately resolving the initial effect, this top text here. Or he can choose not to resolve it and leave it face down. And the reason he might want to do that is if an event, a Dracula event, ever makes its way and it falls off the board, excuse me, then the matured effect happens. And the matured effect is always something much better for Dracula. But it's got to survive 6 rounds of play before it matures. So, a lot of these are gaining influence and stuff like that. So that's the basic premise of Dracula's turn. He's going to choose a new location, place the new location card there after sliding everything down, pick a, so let's say he moved to that location, pick an event, plant that event, and then you always draw back up. If you ever have less than 5 of these event cards in your hand as Dracula, you always immediately draw back up to 5. And then you're going to just move on. Now, a few other things. Dracula has a player card here that we can look at. He has a few abilities. First of all, he has Rage. That means after he defeats a hunter, and we'll talk about combat in a second, he gets to advance the influence track by 2 plus the number of despair tokens on the track. So remember I said earlier, the more despair tokens, the faster he's going to gain influence. Now this is interesting. This is called Pride, and it's listed as an ability, but I think it's more of a hindrance, because a lot of times if Dracula is discovered early, he just wants to get away. He doesn't want to fight. But Dracula is not allowed to play the cards that allow him to escape a fight. They're called escape as mist or escape as bat, until he has participated in a number of combat rounds equal to the number of despair tokens. So that means he can't just run away. He has to fight at least 1 round initially, and then he can escape. Finally, the Fury of Dracula. After you place a city location card or a hide card on the trail, while all 3 despair tokens are on the time track, you get to advance the influence track by 3. So once you get all 3 despair tokens, if you go 3 weeks, 3 complete rounds in the game, then every single time you place a new card on this track, well, guess what? The influence goes up. So you're going to win really, really fast as Dracula if you can get all 3 despair tokens out. All right, a little bit more information about playing as Dracula, which is admittedly probably the hardest role to play, and I would recommend the most experienced gamer at the table should play as Dracula. All right. These different locations along this array, those are called hideouts. So any cards or rules that make reference to hideouts, they're talking about these locations, which again are usually a location and an event combination. All right. If Dracula chooses to go to a sea space, well, that's not the best for Dracula. Sometimes he's cornered and he has to, but Dracula can travel by sea, but he doesn't like to. As soon as Dracula goes out to sea, he immediately suffers 2 damage. He just does not like being out at sea. Maybe he can't escape the sunlight, I don't know. But you would put 2 damage tokens on Dracula as soon as he goes to sea. Now, if he travels from one sea space to another, well, that is going to cost him 1 damage token every time he goes from one sea space to another. So going out to sea, you're not only announcing to all the hunters, hey, I'm in a water space right now, but you're also going to be taking damage as long as you're out to sea. The other thing I want to talk about are these rumor tokens. I mentioned them at the beginning during setup. Dracula's going to start with 1, and every time a despair token comes out, he's going to get another rumor token. And all rumor tokens are ways for Dracula to spread his influence. After Dracula has shifted these down and placed a new location and a new event, if he has a rumor token, he can place it on any one of the first 3 hideouts that he's already been to, or the one he's currently in. So he might put it here. The advantage of the rumor token is, if this card makes it all the way down through all the hideouts, and then is resolved via the matured event, so when you resolve the matured event with a rumor token on it, the rumor will increase Dracula's influence by 3. So getting rumors all the way through the array of hideouts is really good for Dracula. So if he can get all 4 of his rumors through, even if he does nothing else, that's worth 12 influence, and you only need 13 to win the game as Dracula. The other thing Dracula has are these powers. They may not be called power cards, but basically they're powers. He starts with these 4, and they say on the back of them exactly how they work. I won't go through them in detail, but oftentimes, instead of placing a location card here, or in addition to placing a location card, you can play a power card. And these are usually pretty good for Dracula, like Misdirect allows you to clear a hideout. Clearing a hideout means you remove all the cards and tokens from that hideout, get it out of the game. You might want to do that to prevent the hunters from finding your trail. Wolf form basically allows you to move 2 spaces instead of 1. This is a great way if you're pinned down. It lets you go through hunters without stopping where they are. Feed allows you to recover damage, and Dark Call allows you to draw 5 new encounter cards. So now, instead of having 5 of these cards in your hand, now you'll have 10, because these encounter cards, as they're called, there is no hand limit for Dracula. Now, you may have caught on to something by now. If Dracula has to play these cards into these hideout slots whenever he moves there, and then that card is out of the deck, well, that means Dracula can never double back to a location he's already been to. And you're absolutely right. It is hard for Dracula to move around the board because he can't double back. He always has to be moving forward unless that hideout falls all the way off the board. Once it falls off the board, it goes back into the location deck, and then he can go back there again. So his movement is rather restricted. But in the advanced rules, there is a way for Dracula to mitigate that, and that's with layers. That's these 3 spaces down here. And the way layers work is that if a hideout works its way all the way down to the 6th hideout slot, when it's supposed to fall off the board, Dracula has a choice. He can either resolve it with the matured event, maybe he resolves this, and then he gets that card back, and then this card goes away, just like normal, or he can keep it hidden and slide it into any one of these 3 layer slots. Now, layer slots do several things. The first of which is you're allowed to go back into a slot that is in a layer for the rest of the game as long as it's here. So this is Zagreb, I guess. If you were adjacent to Zagreb and this is one of your layers, well, instead of putting a new location card at spot number 1 of the hideouts, you can pick up this location card and put it over here, and that's your new location. So having layers are ways that you can sort of double back. Your layers are sort of safe spots that you can always go to. But there's an even more powerful thing that layers do. So let's say that this hideout became a layer, and when it became a layer, it had an encounter card on it. That encounter card will stay there, and if a hunter were to stumble onto a layer, Dracula would be able to ambush him by immediately revealing the ambush effect of that encounter card. But every time you add a hideout to a layer, you actually get to put a second encounter card on it. Now, if a hunter were to go into a city that has your layer in it, Dracula can ambush them twice, and he resolves both of the top effects of these encounter cards. And in fact, if Dracula doubles back to his lair, when he moves this to spot number 1 of the hideout track, let's pretend that's not there, both of these go with it, and a new encounter goes on it. So if you double back and go to your layers over and over and over again, they actually become deadly, deadly traps for the hunters, because you will get to resolve all of the encounter cards as for their ambush effects when they are triggered. Now, when I was explaining all the actions that the hunters can do on their turn, I skipped one. I skipped the search action. And the reason is the search action doesn't make any sense until you understand what Dracula can do. And now that you do, we'll talk about the final thing that a hunter can do on their turn, either day or night phase, and that is search. If a hunter is in a city that has been revealed, in other words, it is one of Dracula's hideouts or lairs, they may search. And what that does is that it will reveal and resolve all of the encounter cards in that city. Well, why on earth would you want to do that? Well, probably because if Dracula chose not to resolve it, that means that if it becomes a matured encounter card, then it's really good for him. So if you've discovered one of his hideouts and Dracula chose to not ambush you with its immediate effect, that probably means he's trying to save it for its matured effect. So as your action, you can sort of force his hand and make him do that ambush effect right away, so he cannot do the matured effect. It's going to cost you probably, but it might be worth doing. Now, I've spent all this time talking about the hunters trying to find Dracula, beat him up and kill him, drive a stake through his heart. But we haven't talked about how that actually happens. Once the hunters finally find Dracula, and the way they do that is they move into the city where Dracula currently is, or that very first hideout spot on the trail of where Dracula has been. If any hunter ever goes to that spot, well, then Dracula has been discovered, and you actually pick up his miniature, take it off of that first spot, and move it to that physical location, and now a fight is going to happen. Now the fight will only happen during the next dawn phase or dusk phase. And that's important because depending on when the discovery happens, it might be possible for another hunter to make their way to that same location, which means that both hunters will get to fight Dracula. But we'll talk about how that works in a second. For now, let's just assume that Lord Goldeming has discovered Dracula's location, and they're going to have a fight during the next dawn phase, before the day phase occurs. All right. Well, the first thing that happens is the character that is engaged with Dracula is going to have a fight, grabs these 3 combat cards. These are set aside at the start of the game. There's actually one copy for every character: escape, punch, and dodge. The back of these cards look exactly like item cards, and that's on purpose. But these are not in the item deck. They're set aside at the beginning of the game, and he's going to draw all 3 of these cards into his hand, as well as any item cards he may have picked up along the way. And these cards are now in his hand, and these are what he's going to use for combat. Dracula is going to draw 5 cards from his combat deck and look at them, and these are going to be in Dracula's hand. And then what happens is each player is going to choose 1 card to play. So let's pretend that Dracula, he is going to play Strength, and he puts it out face down. And then Lord Goldeming, he is going to play Dodge, and he puts it out face down. You then simultaneously reveal the cards, and the first thing you're going to do is you are going to compare these symbols. So Dracula's card has a fist symbol. Then you look at the hunter's card and you ask, does that same symbol appear? In this case it does. Great. What that means is, if the symbols match, all the text on Dracula's card is canceled. This card just doesn't happen. It's flipped face down. Nothing happens. Then you resolve the effect of the hunter's card. In this case, Dracula tried to punch him and he dodged. Nothing happens. All right, so those have been played. Dracula is going to draw a new card into his hand. There's escape as bat. So maybe he wants to get away from this fight. The hunter and Dracula will then go another round of combat where they will choose a card to play. Maybe he's going to try to escape, and Dracula is going to try to mesmerize him. Okay, so they come out, they reveal. Okay, so first you ask the question again, do the symbols match? In this case, no. If they don't match, that means that Dracula's card does take effect. The hunter is mesmerized. You suffer 1 fewer damage from that hunter's weapon cards. Keep this card face up until the end of combat. So that card he is now mesmerized. He's less likely to suffer damage. He plays escape. You are removed from this combat. Okay, so he ran away. But let's say he didn't play that. Let's say instead he tried to use garlic. All right, well, in that case, he did not cancel Dracula's effect. If you're engaged with the hunter and fangs or claws was played, the vampire suffers 2 damage. It wasn't. So nothing really happened here except that the hunter is now mesmerized. All right, so that stays face up because it said to remind us that you are mesmerized. Now this is interesting. This card that the hunter played in the first round now comes back into his hand. And the garlic is the discard card. Dracula's cards stay discarded, okay? So they go again, and Dracula's going to draw a card, and he's going to play it, and he's going to play a card, and they reveal cards. Symbols do not match, so Dracula's thing occurs. Fangs. Dracula would heal 2 damage, and the hunter suffers 2 damage. So 2 damage tokens would go on Lord Goldeming. Also, if it is night and the engaged hunter is mesmerized, he also becomes bitten, which means you take this bite token and you're going to put it on Lord Goldeming. We'll talk about what the bite tokens mean at the end of the fight. All right, but while he was getting bitten, Lord Goldeming punched the vampire, so you would take a damage token and put it on Dracula. So they hurt each other there. All right, then, again, that card goes away, that goes to the discard, this card comes back, and you're going to keep going like that until either one of them is killed or knocked out. If Dracula is the one knocked out and he has 15 health, then the game is over and the hunters win. If the hunter is knocked out, then he has to go to the nearest hospital. There are 3 spaces on the board with a hospital symbol on it. And when you go to the hospital, you wipe your entire board. All your cards, all your items, all your tokens, your health tokens, your bite tokens, everything. Everything is gone. You're basically starting over from scratch. And the hospital spaces are technically one removed from the city space. So it takes an entire action just to move from the hospital back to a regular space before you can get back into the game. Or the other way a fight can end is if one of them escapes. If the escape ends, if someone escapes, the fight's just over, and you carry on with the next phase of the game. Now, these bite tokens. Every character can absorb a certain number of bite tokens before they are killed. Most of the characters have only 1 fang symbol on their card. So Lord Goldeming or Dr. John Seward, they can take 1 bite symbol. As soon as they get their second one, they are knocked out or killed, and the same thing happens. They immediately go to the hospital, lose all their cards, have to start over. So there's 2 ways the hunters can be knocked out or killed. Either by suffering damage equal to their health or receiving 1 more bite token than they have space for. Now what's interesting, Van Helsing is a tough old crow. He has 2 bite marks, so he can actually sustain 2 bite tokens, and it's on his 3rd that he will succumb to Dracula's bite. And Mina Harker, she starts with a bite token on her, so she is weakened right away. Now, weakened is a term that will appear in the reference manual along with other terms like delayed. They all have different meanings. Different cards will say becomes, delayed or weakened. I'll explain weakened. When you're weakened, you have to have 1 of your encounter cards and I think 1 of your item cards face up all the time so Dracula can see what they are. And delayed means you knock your character token down and it takes an entire action to stand them back up, so it slows them down. And there's other terms like that that you can look up in the reference manual if they ever come up during the game. Just to illustrate what I said during combat, here are the hospital spaces. There's 1 in Madrid, 1 in Rome, and 1 up there in Budapest. If a hunter were to ever become incapacitated or lose a fight, they go to that space, they lose everything they have, and then it takes an entire action to move from the hospital to the normal Madrid space. As I said, it's possible for more than 1 hunter to be in the same city as Dracula when a fight occurs. So the way that works is everyone in the fight, both hunters and Dracula, are all going to play 1 card, and then Dracula gets to choose which of these 2 hunters is he going to engage with. And if he engages here, then these 2 cards will be compared to see if anything cancels anything out, and then they will resolve the rest of the effects. This card is just going to happen no matter what. So it's very advantageous for the hunters to have multiple hunters fighting Dracula at the same time, because Dracula can only engage with one hunter at a time during a fight. With each subsequent rounds of the fight, Dracula can change who he's going to engage with. It doesn't matter. But that's how it works when you have more than one hunter engaged in a fight with Dracula. So there you go. There's everything you need to know to play the advanced rules for Fury of Dracula. If you catch any mistakes I made, please put them in the comments below. If you have requests for me to do certain games, just like Jeremy Berger did, yeah, just contact me either through comments or through the messaging system in YouTube. I'll try to get the game done if I can. It was hard for me to find a copy of Fury of Dracula, but I'll get to it if I can. Again, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if that's the kind of thing you want to do. And we'll see you next time at Get Ready for Game Night.